there was a ceremony for new Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh at the White House, and you actually were there. So why don't you tell our viewers kind of what it was like to be there at the end of the battle? He's a new Supreme Court Justice. What the mood in the room was like, what the ceremony was like.
Well, Jerry, obviously it was an honor to be there, to be invited. I was there on behalf of Judicial Watch, and it was full of other conservative warriors who've been fighting for Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation to the Supreme Court. You had Senate leaders like Senate Majority Leader McConnell, who was instrumental in getting him approved. You had a bunch of legal heavyweights, federal judges, top-notch conservative lawyers, and then you had, incredibly, every Supreme Court Justice of the United States who came in to watch Justice Kavanaugh be confirmed to the Supreme Court. Wow. And I thought the president really did a great job in the sense that he began by apologizing to Justice Kavanaugh for what he had been through, for what both he and his family had been through. And he was right to do that. I'm sure there are probably those who didn't want to even talk about it anymore, but it needed to be confronted because judges, as the president said, Justice Kavanaugh is an innocent man, and he was maligned and smeared and abused by this Senate process. So it was a relief to see him finally on the Supreme Court. The effort to overthrow the Senate failed. But it's been damaged, and they damaged him, they damaged his reputation, they damaged his family, and in my view, there's got to be accountability for that, and we're going to be taking steps in that regard. Matter of fact, we already have in some respects, but it was a great victory, and given what went on over the last few weeks, pretty much everyone there has been exhausted in one way or another, those of us who have been fighting most directly. So it was good to finally be able to get together and celebrate this victory for the rule of law, the Constitution, and of course for Justice Kavanaugh, who, other men would have pulled out in facing these terrible allegations. And the president, again, deserves credit for standing by Judge Kavanaugh, because other presidents would have said, no, let's stop this and put another nominee forward. But he didn't do that. So it was a good team in that regard, the president and Judge Kavanaugh, and they had each other's backs. And I think the American people will be better off because now we have a great Supreme Court justice on the Supreme Court, much better than Justice Kennedy was, and so will help solidify a more conservative court for generations.
So let's kind of go back to then Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, what the nomination and confirmation process was initially like, because before these recent allegations, the process itself initially was already kind of spiraled out of control to a large extent. During his nomination or confirmation hearings originally back in September, I know that Judicial Watch has filed complaints that followed from that. So, it's kind of, I think, lost in some people's minds that that even before these recent allegations, the Senate Democrats' efforts were already kind of heading in sort of an off the wall kind of direction. So could you walk our viewers through and kind of remind them what it was like even before these recent allegations took place?
Well, the original confirmation hearings were also awful in the sense that you had left-wing groups come in, they sent their protesters in, some of whom were paid, to disrupt the proceedings. And I was able to attend at least part of those hearings, and I can tell you in these rooms, when someone stands up and starts yelling, it's disruptive. Everything comes to a halt. The police have to remove them, placing the witness, the protester in jeopardy, the police officer in jeopardy, and bystanders in jeopardy. And they're resisting arrest, and it was a violent protest in the end that was going on repeatedly in, of all places, ironically, a nomination hearing, confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court. And you had this affront to the rule of law. And then on top of it, you had the Democrats on the panel breaking the rules. You had Senator Cory Booker, for instance, make a show of putting documents on the record he wasn't supposed to. and saying he violated Senate rules, the violation of which would require his expulsion. Now, it turns out the rules he purported to violate, he actually didn't during the hearing, so he had to go back later and post materials online that were prohibited by Senate rules, thereby violating the rules. And it was rule breaking and disrespect for the rule of law, because those documents that he posted were only provided to the committee based on promises of confidentiality that wouldn't be breached, and that's why you're not supposed to release them. And so by Senator Booker, by releasing them, he broke the rules, he admitted he did it, and it's only Judicial Watch to say, well, if you break the rules, you got to have an enforcement action. So we filed an ethics complaint with the Senate Ethics Committee. We'll see what happens. But you know, in terms of after-action activities, you know, everyone's practiced calling their senators to support Judge Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. Well, call that same number again, 224-3121, and ask the Senate Ethics Committee and ask your senators, are they going to support holding Senator Booker accountable? He broke the rules, and again, and if he's found liable for breaking the rules, he can be expelled from the Senate. And if we don't want this lawlessness to continue, the Senate's got to police itself.
Right. Quite famously referred to it as the closest to his Spartacus moment as he was ever going to get. Right?
Yeah, he ain't Spartacus, that's for sure.
But your point there that if there isn't accountability for tactics like this, tactics that break the rules, then things like this are going to continue to happen. And we actually, so after that sort of initial confirmation hearing, confirmation process, as things seem to be moving along towards confirmation, that's when this initial allegation from Dr. Christine Ford leaked out to the media, to the Senate. I mean, do we even fully know at the moment how the story sort of initially happened?
Yeah, I'd like to know how we're going to figure that out. You know, the Senate isn't subject to the Freedom of Information Act, so we can't subpoena or, ask under the Freedom of Information Act Senator Feinstein for her records about how she handled this allegation. The allegation came to them last July, at least the Senate Democrats. They sat on it for weeks and weeks, and there are one of two things you can draw from that. Either Feinstein looked at the allegation, found it wanting, and didn't act on it, or they sat on it purposely to blow up the confirmation process after the hearings took place. You know, it was interesting about that hearing that took place with Ford and the others. What I thought was news about it was we found out more about the corruption of Senator Feinstein's operation. They had this information when Judge Kavanaugh was interviewed by the committee, was interviewed by the FBI initially, and they sat on it. And then it turns out that they had, for instance, recommended the lawyer that was working for free for Dr. Ford. So all sorts of things need to be investigated about how Dr. Ford, who said she didn't want her name out there, had her name be put out there, and who's responsible for it. And if the Senate broke the rules again, like as was done by Senator Booker, any senators then broke those rules. You know, this is why you have an ethics process in theory. And are they going to hold each other to account? Now, they won't do it if they don't hear from voters. I can guarantee you that.